My name is Marc van Grieken and I will be your chair this afternoon. I am a landscape architect actually, and I've moved from the Netherlands to Scotland some 40 years ago. In 2006, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and especially in the last 5 to 10 years, I've been increasingly interested in research related to Parkinson's disease. The Medical Research Council funds research at the forefront of any research undertaken related to medical conditions. At the forefront of science to prevent illness, to develop therapies, and to improve human health. The public partnership strategy was launched in 2024, in July of this year. And this outlines the Medical Research Council's ambition and actions the MRC will take to ensure that the public voice is embedded in all their research projects. And the aim of that is to improve human health for all. Now, today's session will have contributions from a great group of public partners leading in their field. I hope they will inspire you with examples of their involvement in laboratory-based research and their involvement with strategy development. They will use a variety of short presentations of videos as well as, of course, their own presentations. Whilst a lot of the examples we share with you today are related to Parkinson's disease, the principles underpinning this webinar and the lessons we hope to learn apply across all disease areas and all research areas. And one of the projects in particular that we will be highlighting has won multiple awards, and that's the result of their wide-reaching impact. A few more points to note before we go into the matter much more fully. The presentations, you will note, and the presenters may use very different terminology. They may talk about public partnerships, or they may talk about public involvement, or they may talk about public engagement, or use the term PPI, which will be familiar to some of you, or most of you. All of us, though, are focused on the same thing. Different ways, and the many ways in which the public can be involved in research, how it can come together with the research community, and so help to shape and improve and accelerate research. We have a lot of interesting examples and experiences to share with you today. But sadly, of course, I might also have to keep you to time, and therefore I might interrupt you if our speakers keep going too long. In Dundee, the Dundee Research Interest Group was established by Parkinson's UK about 7 years ago. It was the second research interest group that Parkinson's UK established in Scotland, following the first one in Edinburgh. The research interest groups are part of the Parkinson's UK's research support network, and they are established where it is possible or to form close working relationships with research institutions, university departments, etc. The establishment was the result of a number of meetings taking place by people within the Parkinson's community who had expressed an interest in research, and research staff at the Medical Research Council's protein phosphorylation and ubiquitylation unit in Dundee. That led to the agreement that it was worthwhile to set up a research interest group, and we did indeed bring people together. This included people with lived experiences, people who have Parkinson's themselves, or people who may be living with someone with Parkinson's, parents or other family member, as well as clinicians at Nine Wells, for example, or researchers at the University of Dundee. By default, perhaps, because nobody else wanted to take it on, I became the chair at that time, which I later handed over to one of our speakers today. So I will conclude with introducing some of our speakers for now. Brendan Hawdon, currently the chair of the DRIG, is an Irish physics graduate originally, and he was a research scientist before joining the European Union, the European Commission's Research and Innovation Department. He later headed the Horizon research program in his role within the coordination unit. Horizon, of course, is a European Union's research-funded program where money is granted to either institutions or individuals on a competitive basis. That means they have to bid for it, of course, in competition with each other. Brendan was diagnosed some 7 years ago with Parkinson's, and he has led the Dundee Research Interest Group for the last 3 years. Brendan's wife is Joanna Goodburn. Joanna's husband, of course, is Brendan. Joanna trained as a lawyer and is a former Scottish and European Union civil servant. She manages at the present time 2 community pharmacies, and she has actually very close personal experience of Parkinson's disease. Her maternal grandmother had Parkinson's disease, and Brendan was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease only 6 weeks after her own father was also diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Since their return to Scotland, Jo has become a very active member of the Dundee Research Interest Group. She is extremely enthusiastic and persuasive, and she is particularly interested in arranging events that bring people in close contact with research. Both Brendan and Jo are passionate about their role and the vital effect of engaging with research. Joy Milne was a carer for 45 years, looking after her mother-in-law and her husband. Joy was a nursing lecturer when the 1968 white paper in general practice was being developed. This was about training practice nurses, and she worked with the King's Foundation in research. Joy has hyperosmia and now works in Manchester University, developing a biomarker for Parkinson's disease, for Parkinson's. Joy may also already be known to you as the woman who can smell Parkinson's. Our 4th speaker, who we'll hear from later, is Dr. Esther Sammler, and she's a research group leader in the MRC protein phosphorylation and ubiquitylation unit at the University of Dundee. Esther is a consultant neurologist and it has Tayside. And as well as running her own research lab, she teaches undergraduate students and sees patients in her clinics. She's an active member of the Dundee Research Interest Group and a brilliant advocate for public involvement in research. I very much look forward to hearing Esther later again when she joins us for the panel discussion. Angela Ruddock, our 5th member, will give you a fascinating insight in public contributions to research. Angela has nearly 12 years' experience as an HR manager, which was prior to her retirement. She's a full-time working mother and latterly a family carer for older parents. She's also a grandmother and childminder for 2. And although she considers herself well past middle age, she is now taking that older age group in research and in questionnaires. She's a public contributor because of the health issues in her family and also because she cares for her elderly relatives. She has particular interest in diabetes and MLTC. Angela will talk to you about improving communications between the GP and patient and other elements of her work. Angela, I may invite you now to take the floor and tell us something about your experiences.
Hi, thank you, Mark, for the introduction. I'd like to start by sharing a short video that highlights some MRC strategy development work that I've been involved with as a public partner. It's the Creating Public Partnerships for Better Research.
I'm very excited to introduce the MRC's first public partnership strategy. So the Medical Research Council invests public money to improve the health of the nation. It's crucial that we focus on issues that are important to the population in general. And public partnerships provide one vehicle to ensure that the research that we're supporting is relevant to everyone in the country. So the partnerships are twofold. Crucial element is us communicating the discoveries that we make to the general public. But another, arguably more important, is listening to the general public so that we can focus our strategy in a direction that's most likely to have an impact on their lives.
We facilitated a co-development process between the MRC, vocal and public and community partners. And we did this in a number of ways. We had an external advisory group to really think about what would we like to see in a public partnership strategy. We also ran lots of workshops. They included around 130 people from across a variety of different backgrounds. And we really sifted through some of the aims and the vision of what a strategy should look like. We then sent that strategy out to consultation. We received about 350 responses to the consultation, and overwhelmingly, we found that people were very supportive of the strategy.
So the strategy builds on our belief that having diverse input from different people, different beliefs, ideas, knowledge, and background will really enrich how we develop our strategy moving forward.
Well, the benefits of embedding public voice in medical research are threefold. So I think that there is something there about making sure that there is greater ownership, that there is legitimacy of the use of public funds, and that we are able to seize opportunities to make the research community much more equitable and inclusive.
So initially, the public partnerships strategy is for 3 years, but we're in this for the long game, because we believe that by listening to the public, by engaging the public, so that they can help us set our priorities, that we will have the greatest impact.
Okay, so there's a key point I'd like to pick up from this video, because it's something that I care passionately about, and it's the importance of diversity in public partnerships. It's a word that is going to be used a lot, but I think is really important. And this is something that I was very aware of when I joined the external advisory group that Bella has referred to there. I met so many different people with so many views and backgrounds, and it's very important when looking at developing dialogue to ensure that there is diversity in the group. It makes a rich contribution, and that's a big takeaway that I took from that group, that we all shared and agreed. The other area that I was concerned about, and I think is important, is making sure that we invest time in understanding the communities that you're not necessarily part of, understanding their different needs, and really supporting the diverse input into your project. I've been involved in quite a number of projects over the years, and I've seen the importance and benefits of discussions around language, culture, accessibility requirements, communication preferences, and other work or life commitments that you might have or that other people have to bring to the project. Taking those into account and valuing those is very important. These discussions can really shape involvement and the final success and the impact of the project. So when interacting with public partners, I recommend focusing on two things in that area. First of all, it's obvious, but sometimes not when you're involved in the middle of these discussions. Use non-specialist language. It's a point that Joe and Brendan are going to discuss, I think, in their talk later on. But the strategy day that I was involved in, the MRC's Better Methods, Better Research Strategy Day, it challenges specialists, my understanding of specialist and technical languages. And I felt on that day I needed to ask for the meanings of specialist terms and acronyms to be explained. And this is something that if you're not experienced or you're not confident, it's not something that you want to raise. So you want to make people at ease, you want to make them feel that they're welcome. And the first thing you do then is to make sure that what you're saying means something to them and they're not confused with a load of specialist terms and acronyms. The other area is building trust. In order to make this at all possible, my advice to all those wanting to involve the public is to be strategic and involve the public with all your planning, particularly in the initial planning stages. We can have more impact there by working together. Remember also, there's a lot of support and advice in helping you to work with public partners now. There are a lot of experienced people. There are a lot of people who can advise if you are not familiar. And there are lots of great facilitators who can create a safe space for you and your public partners to get together. So from my experience, facilitation can help set ground rules, remind everyone of confidentiality, enables everyone to leave their titles and their positions at the door so that everyone feels equal and comfortable in the discussions. And it allows time for more meaningful and two-way dialogue. And that's something I think that Joy will want to talk about further too. Okay, so those are some of my key issues and areas that I think you need to take into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angela. That's fabulous insight in your experience of being involved in the Medical Research Council strategy development. In the next part of our webinar, we're going to focus on and share some of the examples of how the Dundee Research Interest Group works in partnership with the MRC protein phosphorylation and ubiquitylation unit, the MRC PPU. How does the DRIG share and shape laboratory-based research? And as the name implies, unnecessary to repeat for those of you who don't know, actually, the MRC PPU is an MRC funded research unit at the University of Dundee. Their name is complicated. You won't be surprised it's taken me ages to be able to pronounce that term. But the aim of the research unit is simple. They want to understand how cell regulation influences health and disease, such as Parkinson's, and to use then that knowledge to facilitate the development of new medications and new technologies or therapies. So if you were to establish a public partnership, what should you be thinking about? So we've grouped some of the experiences that we will share today into some important themes. And these themes you may want to consider when establishing a public partnership. And Angela has, of course, set the scene for this already very well. You will need facilitating a meaningful two-way dialogue, which is something that Joy will talk about. You may need to use, in fact, you should use, a very non-specialist language, or as much as possible non-specialist language. That's rather ironic in the context of the name of the unit in Dundee, of course. But the importance of using non-jargon, non-specialist language that can be readily understood by everyone, is very important. And the process will need to value different, especially the public contributions. All these themes link to both the UK standards for public involvement and the Medical Research Council's public partnership strategy. To kick off this section then, I will hand over to Joy, as she will talk about her experiences in testing and sharing exchanges, a tool that was co-developed or co-created to facilitate meaningful two-way dialogue between researchers and the public. Over to you, Joy.
Thank you, Mark, for the introduction, and Angela for her thorough coverage of the subject. The extensive research established the need for involving a dialogue and a two-way conversation, a meaningful two-way conversation between researchers and members of the public. When I looked at this, first of all, I thought, what are the MRC PPU values? And these will underpin the meaningful dialogue. They say we value collaboration in all that we do, working in an unusually collaborative environment. I have to say I am impressed with the collaboration that has been formed within the MRC PPU. But I looked further and I found the word kindness. And it says we value kindness. And through this, we achieve more by working together. These are small steps, but they have produced significant results. Next slide, please. The MRCPP have chosen a critical unmet need in Parkinson's, the diagnosis. So over the past 10 years of research and advocacy, I have learned that the main question is the need. The emotional impact is devastating. Very few opportunities afterwards to have meaningful, full conversations that enable those living with PD to understand it. So I'm going to quote a paper, Delivering the Diagnosis of Parkinson's Disease, Setting the Stage with Hope and Compassion, and the references below. But one of the authors is a very good friend, Sonia Mather. She's a founder of the PD Avengers. She's an MD who was diagnosed as a woman, very young, and she has shown the words are with compassion and understanding, and with hope and compassion, I should say. Next slide, please. We're now going to show you a webinar where Dr. Myrtle McCutt, who actually inspired this with Darshka, on the MRCP exchanges.
The Parkinson's is a degenerative condition of the brain. It's a progressive condition in the brain and has a real impact on the lives of people that are diagnosed and affected. Right now, there isn't a cure or a treatment, but there will be. But for somebody right now, any improvements in how that patient's experiences and lived experiences are will improve their quality of life. Yes, medications and pharmacological inputs are important, but also anything that's non-pharmacological is also equally as good. In some instances, taking a pill would be helpful. Equally can be talking therapies, interactions, social interactions.
Exchanges is an interpretive card activity that we've co-produced with people with lived experience of Parkinson's and our researchers in MRC PPU to help people have better conversations, deeper, more meaningful conversations about Parkinson's and Parkinson's research. One of the things that I think is a real success of it is that it's been co-produced from the very beginning. We've had people with lived experience of Parkinson's, so people living with Parkinson's and carers, our MRC PPU researchers, an external artist and myself involved from the very beginning. We had some really interesting conversations around how do we make sure that your perspective of Parkinson's is represented in the cards? So how do we make sure we include your lived experience of Parkinson's or your Parkinson's research, or in some cases, a mix of both? We also had some interesting conversations around the question cards to include alongside the art drawings and came up with questions that really help prompt deeper, more meaningful conversations about Parkinson's. One thing that was really important to us when we were actually producing the card pack was thinking about accessibility. We really thought hard about the size of the box, the size of the cards, the thickness of the cards, and we also included a QR code in the box to link to a webpage to allow translation of the question cards and instruction cards. The immediate impact that we've seen from people using the cards was amazing. They broke down barriers, they removed any kind of sense of hierarchy and allowed people to have deeper conversations about things that they said they hadn't even spoken to friends and family about.
When I first used them, there was this overwhelming relief. And looking back, I would have liked that relief to have happened when Les was diagnosed. I think if we'd had that understanding, that depth of understanding that the cards give, we would have understood what was happening to Les. No doubt about it. I think there is not an awful lot of understanding of the research for a lot of people with Parkinson's, but the cards give simple, very simple, exact direction for a conversation that is relevant within Parkinson's.
It was, I think, a very deep experience. I found myself, when discussing some cards, opening up and being able to say things that actually would probably not have said off the cuff or spoken about in sort of chunks of conversations that I would have in an outreach event. They could share with us symptoms or aspects of Parkinson's that might actually be useful for us to understand better the data that we have.
We have found that the card activity works well in groups as well as pairs, which is why we'd originally developed them. And the cards also work really well between people with lived experience without a researcher present.
It was actually incredible when Sarah and Dan went to this big conference, and it was clear to them that this was going to be much more of a generally beneficial activity. It seemed to connect with people regardless of their country, nationality, language.
We had charities, industry colleagues come in and chatting to us and asking to partner with us to share the exchanges cards more widely. And that's really exciting for us because we could see the impact that the cards can have globally now.
The model for getting people together to talk, to engage, to deeply interact could be extremely important for other chronic conditions, brain conditions such as motor neuron disease, Alzheimer's disease, but also I think even conditions such as cancers, chronic heart diseases.
We're really excited that the project's been recognised by multiple public engagement awards now, including the Stephen Fry Public Engagement Award. It allows more people to hear about our project and can help us reach new audiences and make sure that we're getting these cards out into the wider Parkinson's community.
And I think it's an insight, as I say, it's unparalleled. There isn't anything else that does it.
The values of exchanges out of kindness, togetherness, honesty, thoughtfulness, innovation, integrity, rigor, most of all, transparency and openness. Next slide, please. In their own words, the MRC wanted to produce something that gave for the people with lived experience in Parkinson's. We have all discovered a far greater impact, which Sarah just explained, and liaison between all parties, physicians, researchers, students, and those with lived experience has produced striking levels of engagement. Next slide, please. We have a surprise for you. We actually have a documented video of the work we did together, and you will find it at this connection. And if you have any difficulty, contact Sarah Patrick at Parkinson's Exchanges at dundee.ac.uk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy. I'm sure we all agree it's a fascinating initiative. What I hope you've got out of things so far is very helpful to you when you're considering establishing a public partnership. And we also want to congratulate, of course, those who put in that winning performance. Moving forward again, in this webinar, we have some insights for you regarding the importance of the language, the two-way interaction or communication, the breaking down of barriers. And Brendan and Joe are going to talk to us about their experiences with the language issue and how to overcome and address this. So if I may first invite Brendan to speak about the importance of specialist language, or rather the use of non-specialist language.
Thank you, Mark. People use specialist language in all walks of life. Lawyers like Joe here, scientists, but more on the physics side, like me here, and those working in the MRC PPU. Parkinson's disease is very complex. A lot of scientific discussion takes place at the molecular genetic level, which is very hard for non-scientists to follow. Specialist language can be broken down into different parts. A technical part, including the use of terms like prodromal, mitochondria, biomarker, and acronyms, my favorite being LRRK2. We need to focus on both these aspects if we want to break down the barriers to two-way dialogue. Importantly, we need to focus on jargon-free language if we want to share and involve others in research. We've worked on examples on how to do this, and Joe will explain one of these efforts that we made in the past in a short while. Importantly, operating in a plain language enables free-flowing discussions with everyone listening to and valuing all contributions. More engagement means more acceleration of research, raises a broad public awareness, which in the long term makes fundraising easier and generally spreads the message further. Also, people with Parkinson's are more receptive to participating in clinical trials if they understand more. This illustrates the impact clear and plain language can have. Over to you, Joe.
Hello. Yeah, so we've worked very closely with the MRC PPU lab researchers to explain what they're doing in as plain English as we can in talks, in lay summaries, in news stories, and more. We all find this really valuable, and we believe that the MRC PPU is a fantastic example in this field, with Director Professor Dario Alessi demonstrating huge commitment to involving people with Parkinson's and their families early on in their diagnosis. And this creates a culture in the lab which is really inclusive. So we'd like to share 2 brief examples, and Brendan's going to talk to you about how we run the DRIG meetings, our steering group, and then I'll tell you a bit more about our annual meeting.
The steering group of the Dundee Research Interest Group, or more commonly known as the DRIG, is made up of people with Parkinson's, their families, and MRC PPU scientists and clinicians. It's supported by the Parkinson's UK organisation, which is very good and makes it possible to translate this formula across the different parts of the UK. We meet about 5 to 6 times a year and organise events for other people with Parkinson's and involve scientists both from Dundee and other centres. Better use of non-specialised language has many benefits, which we have seen firsthand in our DRIG meetings. For instance, it allows more non-specialists to become involved, thus casting the net wider. Our group has a good gender balance and diversity in terms of our backgrounds and life experiences, and these meetings will motivate both sides, both scientists and those with lived experience. The DRIG organises its own events, and Joe will tell you about one of these particular events, which is termed the Open Days. Joe.
Hi again. So yes, on an annual basis, we organise what we call an Open Doors Day at the MRC PPU lab to share information about what's going on there with people who've been relatively recently diagnosed with Parkinson's and their families. So the first version of this event, which happened a few years ago, had a morning session with really quite technical scientific presentations by scientists from Dundee and other centres across Scotland. And there were quite a few lay people in the audience who were quite quiet and reserved and not particularly involved in the session, although they did get a chance to talk to the scientists over lunch. And then in the afternoon, which is the part of the day that was really working well, they got to go and visit around the lab and be shown around by young scientists. So we reflected on what went well and what didn't go quite so well on the first couple of years' efforts, and we've changed quite a lot. And for the most recent version, we decided that we would introduce the scientists by a layperson. And so if we can move to that slide, actually, that would be great. This is Professor Miratul Mukit and one of our steering group members, Marc, who's a person with Parkinson's. And what we tried to do was ask each scientist in a couple of months before the event to meet with someone that they were twinned with. And in this meeting, they had to have provided a very succinct summary of what their team were trying to establish in relation to Parkinson's research, what their goals were. And in a discussion, the scientist was to explain in sufficiently plain English to the layperson a bit more detail, and they would then introduce the scientist in the morning session. And what most people tried to do was use an analogy that was easily recognizable. So Marc was to explain a little bit about what Miratul is doing in relation to a protein called PINK1. So if we can move to the next slide, I'll show you what Marc did, which was very clever. So he took EE's sort of advert board and changed it to PD for Parkinson's disease and asked us all to think of the brain as a mobile phone network, which requires a lot of phone masts to maintain coverage. And Marc explained that in the course of normal aging, the phone masts can become faulty, as in the second slide there, or because of some form of disease. He then took us into the control room of the mobile phone network. And a very important controller is this guy in the corner called PINK1. He's vital for the brain's network. And sadly, people without PINK1 seem to develop Parkinson's. And so this is why Miratul and his team are spending a lot of time and energy trying to work out why this happens and in what way it could be dealt with. So this was a good way to bring in the work that's being done in that field. And then I'll show you another one, if we can move to the next slide. So this is Andy Hawdon, who's one of the researchers who actually sits in our steering group with us, a lovely guy whose dad sadly was also diagnosed with Parkinson's. And he's busy trying to find a biomarker for Parkinson's in the blood rather than in the spinal fluid or somewhere rather difficult to get at. And when Brendan was introducing Andy, he explained that looking for a biomarker is a bit like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But even worse than that, if the haystack is the person, then really the challenge is that every haystack is different because every person is different. So that allowed Andy to then go on to explain how they were trying to deal with that. Then I met with somebody who's from a slightly different scientific background, Will Farnaby, who's a chemist. And he'd come to join the department from Big Pharma. So his and his team's job is to take some discovery that's been made in the lab and try to find a way to make that into a drug that a person can take without being experimented on. So he tried to explain to me what they're doing. And I have to say, I sadly had to ditch biology in second year of secondary school. So I definitely don't have a scientific background. So it was a big experience for me. Because what Will and his team are doing relates to something called the mitochondria, which is a tiny little bit of one of our tiny little cells. And it's the battery of a cell, if you like, because it creates energy with the chemical reaction that goes on inside it. And a bit like batteries that we use in the real world, these batteries run out eventually and they need to be recycled. You need to take them off to the recycling center, or a process inside all of our cells recycles the mitochondria. This process is called mitophagy, and sadly, in people with Parkinson's, it quite often doesn't work in certain cells. And so these dead batteries eventually kind of pile up and block the processes of the cell, in particular, their ability to communicate, so that your brain isn't sending the right messages to the right bits of your body when you want to do things. At least that was my understanding. And so excitingly, in the lab, some of the cell biologists have discovered a protein called ULK1, which, if it can be moved along to where the pile of batteries in need of recycling are blocking up the process, they can kickstart mitophagy, and you could perhaps clean up all these cells that are not working properly. But what they need to do is find another tiny little molecule that they can hook onto a little dip in the outside of ULK1 and move it along to the pile of batteries. So it's a big quest, and we're really looking forward to hearing from them in our Open Doors Day this year to find out where they've got to on that quest. But for me, what had been planned as a half-an-hour meeting with Will and turned into 2 hours. The best part of it was the email that I got back from him when he sort of corrected the proposal that I'd made for how I was going to introduce him. And he said, "I'm super impressed with your summary. You grabbed so much from our conversation, and I really love what you've written. I can honestly say I don't think that much gets taken away with most conversations I have with researchers. Reading this really put a smile on my face, as it's so nice to see what someone like yourself takes from a conversation about our research." And he explained when we were talking that really he and all his colleagues have gone down this very deep rabbit hole of what they're doing. And suddenly coming back to the surface and having to explain it from the start was a huge new experience for him, especially to someone who originally thought, that protein was just fish and meat and cheese and didn't know anything about cellular proteins. And for me, it was just such an eye-opener because it's great as someone who has a partner with Parkinson's to try to start understanding a bit more about what's actually going on in his brain. But the best part I think for all of us was the reaction that day at the end of the morning session, when all of these lay people in the room after each scientist spoke, they asked questions and they got so much more involved in what was happening, because I think they maybe didn't feel that they were asking a silly question anymore, and they sort of got drawn in by the analogies that we all used. And so really, both for lay people and for scientists watching this, I would really recommend giving it a go, because it's really interesting. And then just to finish, to tell you about the afternoon experience, we use quite a lot of the younger researchers come and help with that on the day, and they help the people with Parkinson's and their families into white coats, and they badge them through all the high security doors and things around the lab. We break the day into small groups of people so that they can move in and around researchers with their experiments going on in front of them. And it's a real eye-opener for all of us lay people, because it's a very exciting, high-tech place to be with lots of incredibly expensive machinery. But what we discovered is that in feedback from the researchers, it's also a really special opportunity for them, because lots of them had never met a person with Parkinson's before, even though they were starting a life where they're going to be spending a huge amount of time working on this condition. And it also clarified how important it is to use non-specialist language that enables these dialogues and great discussions that were had as they were moving around the lab together. They're working so hard and potentially committing their whole career to help fight this disease that it really, I think, made them understand the value of their research, and a lived experience perspective can help in shaping their research. And it demonstrates how inspiring it is for them to meet people with Parkinson's and understand more clearly about that impact. And we just hope that one day they'll be able to sit back and say they found a cure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you very much, Brendan. A lot of information in there to think about. So we've heard about the importance of breaking down barriers and investigating two ways of meaningful conversations and engagement, as well as the role of language that plays in that. And we talked about the collaboration of events, bringing researchers and the public together. A key aspect of that real togetherness depends on value and culture. Is the culture open to true meaningful integration? Are we having a round table with a level playing pitch, whereby researchers, patient organizations, people with lived experiences and or their partners come together to define and shape research? If I may draw your attention to the little diagram, are we still in the world where the doctor sits high up in a chair and the patient is low at the bottom? A very inequitable relationship. Or are we moving to the round table at the bottom, where the contribution of people with an illness, the public outside the research, has an equitable role, or at least the opportunity to play an equitable role as the researchers? Key of this is openness and willing of the researchers to engage in that process. Key in this is that the researchers do not come into the conversation with an attitude, well, what do they know anyway? That is traditionally a prevailing, in some instances, a prevailing attitude or culture. Not in the MRC PPU in Dundee, in our experience. In fact, the opposite. We are always invited to come in and bring our comments to the table. We are always listened to. We are always invited to participate in discussion. We feel, therefore, we are truly valued. And where the public feels truly valued, we can make a better contribution to the development of projects. Our contribution, our comments, are considered when developing research projects. And a simple example, perhaps, of this is a short research project which Esther initiated by inviting one of the students, a student from the University of Galway, at the University of Galway in Ireland, although she's actually from America, to work with myself on a small research project to see how we could collaborate. And this went as follows. A student called Aoife McDerby and myself got together and first of all discussed what her interests were, where her focus lay in Parkinson's research, and similarly, where my interest lay in terms of what type of research I felt was worthwhile or was necessary. And the overlap here had to do with pesticides. Is there a role of pesticides in the occurrence or the development of Parkinson's? That was the question we set. To the table, I brought that lived experience. I brought my views on the role of pesticides. Coming from the Netherlands, coming from an area where bulbs were dipped in pesticides, probably fairly obvious that I might have been there to the table. Aoife looked at that from a different angle. Could she find some evidence of that? And she was fascinated about my lived experience, and I was fascinated about the way you then ultimately in a laboratory go about testing some of those hypotheses. Because I went to the lab, I did the bits with the, I only know the Dutch name, pipettes. I noticed the huge quantity of those tests that need to be done, the commitment that is required from the scientists to do sometimes hours, days of pretty boring work in order to get a much more interesting project, or much more interesting findings. We took that a little bit further by Aoife writing up her experience with that and giving me the opportunity to comment on it. And especially the involvement consultant, Sarah, who has been instrumental in developing this webinar as well, used the information we brought to her to share our collaboration effects of it with the wider world. So, having shared some of the examples of how we brought research staff, people together with public people with an interest in research, we thought it might be useful for the 4 panelists that so far have spoken to have a short debate about how we can overcome this. But firstly, I have to apologize that we won't be able to take questions from the audience during this panel discussion. And you will not be surprised there are a number of prepared questions which I'll pose to the panelists. As a first one, I would like to ask you all, can you share examples of what type of barriers need to be overcome? And how have you handled it? What have you been faced with? What have you done to handle it? And firstly, I might want to ask Joy and Esther to perhaps give their view on this question.
Esther, on you go.
Okay. I would say, so thank you so much, Marc. I think like so far this has been wonderful. So I think that often it can be a problem of where to start for a scientist or for a researcher and who to contact to involve the public in their research. I would recommend finding a clinical colleague to work with, someone who has useful links to people with lived experience in a particular condition. If you're working in a research area that doesn't involve a particular disease, I think a good point of contact would be your university's public engagement or external relations team. They'll usually have links to local community groups that are always more than welcome to work with you. Don't feel you have to start from scratch. Don't feel afraid to ask for help, and make use of the networks and the people who are around you and who have already some experience. And I'm sure everybody will be delighted to support and help you.
Joy, have you got a view on this? Have you got experience particularly with overcoming these obstacles?
Yes, I do think that there is a gap still between starting public involvement. And I think there is a lack of understanding in some quarters to what it involves. We're there with the lived experience, and sometimes we're excluded from things that, in fact, we should be part of.
Angela, do you have a particular perspective on this?
I think I think the issue for me is how early contributors are actually involved, public partners are involved. I think that's quite important, because sometimes you feel you've been invited a bit late to the party, if you see what I mean. And that's when the understanding, I think, can develop better if you're in as early as possible.
Anybody else have further comment on this? Otherwise, I'll move on to the next kind of issue. Are we trained well enough? Have we got enough knowledge to participate in this? Is there enough capacity in that sense to really do this? Because it's challenging to be involved, and it takes time to be involved, and it takes effort to be willing to engage with people with less knowledge and experience as a researcher, which might be more time consuming to engage with. It may be difficult to get those who might be able to participate from the public to free up enough time. They may still be working full time, and they may again have no training. How do we overcome this? Is there available funding for such training and capacity building? If not, how we can get that? An increasingly number of research organizations professes to do patient engagement and co-creation. But in practice, there are still quite a lot of hurdles over. In the Dundee unit, I think the most clear is one of the most clear examples of a culture of sharing and participation and integration. There's no career researching, if I may call it that. It's a genuine willingness and engagement to advance the common aspirations. And we therefore would like to see further embodiment or engagement or inclusion of the training aspect in PhD students' work, for example, which is a good opportunity to demonstrate what we may be able to do to further improve.
I think, Mark, for us,
Yeah.
I think, Mark, for us, there is a way of doing it. I didn't have any training in the aspect of a PPI, and I did go and look. There is a wealth of information between many of the associations that Angela spoke of, and she could say, and also NIHR. I cannot. They have some wonderful connections, like Georgina Norris in Cambridge, who does regular training. I took 4 months and did a set of training modules with NIHR, including Georgina Norris, and they were very, very good.
Thanks, Joy. What are the benefits? Are you able to comment on what you have found the benefits are from being involved in public partnership? Benefits to the wider world, but also benefits to yourself as a participant. Could you perhaps give this a start, Angela?
Yeah, I think so. From a selfish point of view, I suppose, I found this particularly rewarding for me because for developing my own knowledge and my own sort of personal growth. And I found that the particular topics interesting, and so it was very much a self-satisfaction. But from a research point of view, different perspectives improve and enrich research. I think we've discovered from issues around COVID that perhaps if there were more perspectives that contributed to that, there would have been better outcomes in lots of areas. And thirdly, for me, the opportunity to build mutual trust between people like myself and the research community. When I come from a background where there hasn't been an awful lot of knowledge shared, there's not the only stories that you hear tend to be not the very positive ones. And I think actually knowing the communities, working through some of those old issues that happened will actually help build mutual trust.
Thank you. Brandon, have you, as a living experience, what benefits have you?
Thank you, Mark. I also take a personal view, the way Anya does as well. As someone living with Parkinson's, I like to be well informed, and I like to meet like-minded people. I'd like to understand the latest research and news. And let's not forget that there's world-class research happening in Dundee. I mean, Dundee is a superb centre of excellence for Parkinson's research, and not interacting with this institution would be almost like a further denial of my condition. Being involved gives me hope, but it also gives me a sense of how that hope is contextualized in the current state of art of research. So it's very important to have the knowledge, but also to have the limitations explained to you very well. And I benefit from that very much so, being involved with the DRIG with the University of Dundee.
Thank you. Esther, as someone sitting on the inside of the university or the PPU, and hearing all these aspirational activities that we people with Parkinson's or people with lived experience of an illness in the context of the wider, what are benefits to you?
Oh, there's so many. I don't know how much time there is, but I would say as a clinician scientist working on a particular health condition, and in my case, Parkinson's disease, it's an enormous privilege and so much fun, like to share our research efforts with our community, and importantly, like take you all with us on a joint journey. Because in a way, the people living with Parkinson's are, for me, the most important stakeholders for what I do. And personally, I think I learn a lot. It sharpens my science communication skills, as outlined by Joe earlier, talking in a language that is understandable. And it is a huge bonus, and also privilege to have direct access to the patient voice, to the public voice, and perspective. So I'm super grateful that we have this interaction.
Thanks very much, Esther. Joe, I have no doubt you have a view on this. Can you say something
Yes,
about
absolutely. Well, thanks, Mark, particularly as a non-scientist, having this amazing opportunity to be able to hear from people like Esther, Miratul, and all these other wonderful scientists in Dundee in detail about what they're doing really helps you to understand more about how the disease works, and importantly, what might develop in your partner's future. I think it's important, if the opportunity is there, that we can prepare ourselves for how something like Parkinson's or other conditions will develop, since it's pretty certain that they're going to change. And also, on a practical front, being secretary of the research interest group in Dundee has given me the opportunity to contribute something back, if you like, to the process. And I think, as Esther's just said, that allowing them to understand more about those who've got the lived experience and exchanging information is really useful on both sides. So can I just make a quick plug? If this really interests you, either as a scientist or as a person with lived experience, then there are lots of RIGs across the UK now, RIGs research interest groups. I think we're up to 14. So it might be worth trying to find out if there's one in your area. And hey, if there isn't, maybe you should get involved with trying to find out if there's a group of researchers in your area who would be interested. And Parkinson's UK website is somewhere where you can find out how a RIG works. And there's a lovely lady in London who works for Parkinson's UK, Liz, who supports us and helps us with what we're doing. And you could always get in touch with her. Definitely worth it.
Thank you very much, Jo. Something that's always been preying on my mind is how do we increase diversity and represent groupings in society that are not currently easily represented? Do we actually have the tools and the knowledge to approach certain aspects of society that we have no direct contact with? Do we understand the cultural differences that may play a role between groups in society? People are in deprived areas, or people from different ethnic groups, people with different histories and backgrounds. How do we overcome contacting those people, having those people, those groups in society engaged with what we are aspiring to? Any of you want to express a view on this, or have you got any thoughts about it?
Can I just say that in my case, it's very much of going out rather than people coming in. It's meeting people in their own sort of environments that tend to be, I think, more successful. A lot of people I know have not necessarily gone through, if you like, university education and still think of the university or those sorts of academic institutions as not for them. It's good, I think, to get people out, to meet people in different environments, and then that's when the trust starts, and that's when the conversation can start. You know, we're not, it's a bit like the Muhammad and the mountain sort of view for me anyway.
Yeah, Esther, do you see that as do you recognize that? Is this an issue in terms of recruitment of participants in trial or any other aspect?
Oh yeah, you know, I think you know, I think like maybe like people from further far see people in a university in a, you know, in a quite closed environment. And I couldn't agree more with Angela that it's our, you know, that it's our job to break the ice and go out, but that's also not easily done. But I think like again, like in my case, it is you know, I've driven in the past for 2 hours to a small village, and you know, where there were like local Parkinson's groups and so on. So again, it's like trying to somehow find your way along the network. But I think that is something that we definitely need to think about and maybe do better. But I think you know, like with all the downsides of the pandemic, I think everybody's much more literate in technology, and I think that has made a huge difference that people now from far away can join webinars like this one.
Thank you. Bringing people together in research is something we aspire to. Those of us with lived experiences who have contributed their bit today to this webinar could be seen as partly representing our wider contingent. In our case, this refers to Parkinson's disease, but the principle, as we said, applies to any disease area. So we could talk about cancers or about other neurological conditions. Are we representative is a question that I often ask myself. Do we need to be representative, and why? Nobody checks, at the moment anyway, whether Brendan and Joe and I have any relevance or are representative of the community that we profess to represent to some extent. Is that a problem? For me, it's a life question, like the one about diversity, like the question about training and capacity building. How do we go about it? How do we find people, and how can we select people in a fair and transparent way? How do we get people on trials? How do we keep people on trials? These are all, for me, very important questions. I don't know whether that echoes with you, whether that is something you worry about or have answers about.
There are
No.
bodies in the UK now who are invested in this, and there are several of them, and they are very easy to contact if you put up in the web inclusion and diversity, and they are helpful. I used a couple of them in a recent study to get participants involved. It's not easy. It is not easy. I have to say that. That we had to do quite a bit of work on that front in this research project.
Thanks, Joy. I'm going to go to a rounding off, if I may. I hope that those of you who joined us at this webinar have picked up some information and experiences that are relevant to you. The webinar will be shared by the MRC on YouTube, so you can still share it with your colleagues, your friends, your family. And we hope that it will help inspiring you to promote and take part in other partnerships in research. I very much like to thank, first of all, the MRC for inviting and supporting us, those of us who are participating in this webinar, to share our experiences with you. I want to say thank you to the speakers, to Brendan, to Esther, to Joy, Angela, and Joe. I want to say a big thank you to Sarah Patrick, who was the public involvement consultant, who has been tirelessly working behind the screen to help this come together. Thank you all for participating, for joining us in this webinar. And last but not least, thank you, MRC PPU in Dundee, represented here by Esther. Thank you so much for involving us in all your research and inspiring the next generation of medical professionals and researchers to do so too. Before I let you go, please note that the MRC will launch a poll, an online poll, after the webinar. And it would be great if you were willing to tell us what you thought of it. And if you have any ideas for the future, then we would very much welcome to hear that from you. As I said earlier, there have been students, and students are very important in this context. They are the future. And one of the students in her final communications with Dundee said that at its core, the objective of research is to find a cure for any particular disease. But as a researcher, we are quite readily, easily taken up or involved with the very physical aspects, if I may say, the cells, the mitochondria. And we may be losing perhaps sight of the greater purpose of the research. Because we're not talking about the purpose, we're talking about our tests, our laboratory tests. And without such a human component, it can be very difficult to realize how important and how substantial the researcher's work can be and may have on the life of ordinary people. And I leave you with that thought. Thank you very much for participating. And hopefully you will be able to enjoy future webinars organized by the MRC. Thank you all.